I've already talked about my current art project, A Thousand Faces, that deals with getting an MS diagnosis and actually living with MS. But today I want to go even more into detail and talk about why, out of all things possible, I chose to work with watercolors. You know, those nasty colors we were forced to work with during elementary and middle school. I mean, I don't know about you, but I hated it back then. Watercolors are just so unpractical to work with, and it's basically just watered down paint, and that's also exactly what it looks like on paper. And I actually think that this, well, almost hatred that I feel for watercolors that I've built up throughout my school years, was very important for the decision to now paint this topic in watercolors. Because, you know, at heart I'm a photo artist and I will absolutely get back to photography in the future. But MS mostly affected my sight and it took many weeks to get better. And I think I wasn't even home for a whole week when I again felt the urge to express myself. And back then there was no way that I could have taken photos, that I could have expressed myself through photography as I usually would, with the problems I had with my eyes. But you know, this time I didn't even feel like taking photos. Because photography is so complex and detailed and beautiful. And what I wanted to express isn't complex at all, and it's absolutely not beautiful. You know, this illness is pretty simple and quite ugly and way out of my control, something that photography has never been. So my ideas couldn't be brought to life with my beloved photography, but to be honest, my art career started in painting, so I'm familiar with this art form. Though I never voluntarily painted with watercolors. I was more into acrylics. Sometimes oil, but no, acrylics actually were my paint of choice. At some point I found photography and it immediately drew me in. Like the possibilities it has to offer. It just fascinated me and still fascinates me. Photography truly is my first love. And I just didn't want to abuse my favorite art form with this horrible diagnosis that changes so much to the worse. So obviously I needed a different art medium for this. And talking about horrible, do you remember what I said about watercolors in the beginning? So yeah, I hate working with watercolors and I have very strong negative feelings about this illness. Perfect match, isn't it? But actually, that's just the superficial reason for my paint choice. I mean, it's obvious I don't like watercolors, but objectively spoken, watercolors are by far not as vibrant as other paints, like acrylics for example. It's a pain in the ass to mix watercolors, but once they're on paper, they'll happily mix with whatever color they find, without you meaning or wanting them to. It's like water that just runs through your fingers and you think you got some kind of control, but in fact you don't. It just flows and does whatever it wants. At some points you do have a say, but in the long run, you just watch it make its own way. Just like with MS. So, in conclusion, I abandoned photography for this project because I needed something that I can't control, something dull and dirty that could represent what it's like to be diagnosed with a chronic illness, what it's like to live with MS. It was just a few days that I was back home from the hospital. I was staying at my parents during that time. And I went to my old room and looked for that damn watercolor palette that I still got from middle school. I found it and started painting faces and personalities so they could take my place in my story. To act as if this isn't happening to me but to them. Fictional characters born from ugly watercolors into this ugly world.